Hello everybody, it's Dr. Stuart Allen Swerdlow, and this is the Expansions News Podcast for the very last days of July 2019. And as you can tell, I am solo today because Janet is traveling and helping one of our sons to move to a new location. So she will be back tomorrow, and then next week we will both be on the podcast, God willing. And so, I will start with the major stories of this past few days, and then I will go into other things. First thing is, of course, the very big story that happened this week was the questions that were asked on Capitol Hill for former Special Counsel Robert Mueller. I know some people pronounce it Mueller, but it's a German name, and it's Mueller. And he was completely tripped up and forced the lawmakers to repeat their questions during his rapid-fire questioning on Capitol Hill this past Wednesday. Supposedly he had prepared for quite a bit of time for this hearing, and yet it looked like he was in complete confusion. At one point, he even said he wasn't familiar with Fusion GPS, which is the opposition research firm behind the controversial anti-Trump dossier. Well, perhaps he was afraid of being prosecuted for treason if he spoke about it at all in public. And he was reluctant to testify, and he made that clear. However, his questions on the former special counsel's findings that the investigation did not establish any conspiracy between President Trump and Russia. House Judiciary Committee ranking member, Representative Doug Collins, who's a Republican from Georgia, asked Mueller if conspiracy and collusion were colloquially the same, and Mueller said no. Collins then quoted Mueller's own report, which indicated otherwise. So he contradicted his own report. The president and his supporters pointed to the former special counsel and referred to all of this as a witch hunt, of course. Now, Mueller is 74 years old, a former FBI director, and he frequently asked the lawmakers to repeat questions. He answered haltingly, or with just one or two words, and offered no response to harsh attacks on his integrity and impartiality by some of the Republican members. Now, some people have said maybe he's feeble-minded now, maybe he's getting senile, and so on. Excuse me. I'm going to read to you something from my phone. That's why I have it with me today. I personally think that he must be on some kind of antidepressant, maybe some other kind of medications, and he knows he's in very, very big trouble. Now, Nancy Pelosi said that Mueller's appearance was a crossing of a threshold, but continued to resist calls from some members of her caucus to launch impeachment proceedings. Now, she doesn't want to do it. Pelosi said that multiple House investigations of Trump, his finances, and negotiations to build a Trump Tower in Moscow during the campaign will continue. I personally don't see any problem with him wanting to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. Why not? Trump, meanwhile, declared victory, quoting, and I quote, "The Democrats lost so big today, this was one of the worst performances in the history of our country," unquote. And I would have to agree, the whole thing has been a big, terrible show. The Democrats were proven to be wrong, vile, and treasonous, and vindictive. They had become socialists and communists. The so-called squad, the four female member congressional group, is evil and will be removed from office soon enough. And indictments of the Democrats and their related people are coming. And I have a comment to make on this now. First of all, people in Hollywood who I used to respect, who I used to like, I admired their work, people like Bette Midler, people like Barbra Streisand, people like some of the comedians that are out there, they are making comments that prove that they are, like Kathy Griffin, that prove that they are up the butts of the deep state, and maybe their whole careers were formulated by the deep state for some reason. So perhaps they're all programming icons who are now scared of losing their status. My opinion is people in Hollywood, people in the media who are entertainers should stick to entertaining and stay out of politics. Most of them can't put a sentence together unless they have a script in front of them. I worked in Hollywood for many years, and I know that's the fact. Anyway, let's move on. One other thing. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as she is her name, AOC. Not her real name. Her real name is Julia Salazar. Remember that name. Julia Salazar. A couple of years ago, the New York Post wrote a story about her because she was running for office. They said that she lied about her background and her information and her name. Her name is not Alexandria. It's Julia Salazar. Look it up. She's a liar. And Ilhan Omar, as I mentioned last time, married her own brother to bring him into the United States illegally. She has committed crimes that really should have her sent back to Somalia and expelled from the United States and strip her of her citizenship. And that should also go for Miss Tlaib, the Palestinian woman. Let's look at this. All these Muslim women, Ilhan, Tlaib, how do they dress? Big, bright red lipstick. So does Julia Salazar. That's not very Muslim, is it? Why would Ilhan Omar dress like a Muslim and wear her Nefertiti hat all the time, but she has hoop earrings and bright lipstick and nail polish? That's not Muslim. She's a fake. Now to the UK. Actually, I'm excited about this story because, as you know by now, Boris Johnson will be the next, or is the next, UK Prime Minister. And he will be assembling a majority Brexiteer cabinet this week to clear out the Remainers, the ones who have been troublemakers, and end the self-doubt to get Britain ready for leaving the EU on October 31st. And he will do it, not like Miss Theresa May not. He will make the most, and he also will have the most ethnically diverse cabinet in history, and the number of female secretaries of state also increasing. Now, of course, some people criticize him for his girlfriend, whose name is Carrie Simmons, and she has been keeping a low profile. She is a 31-year-old former Conservative Party communications official, and she's been staying out of the media spotlight. And this is the first time in living memory that a UK Prime Minister had an unmarried partner while in office. However, Boris Johnson is 55 years old, and he is still married to his wife of 26 years, Marina Wheeler, with whom he has 4 children. Now, I'm going to read something that was sent to me by some friend, a Russian friend, that I know for many years, and here's what it says. Ali Kemal, an Ottoman political journalist, was exiled by Sultan Abdulhamid II for being a traitor and later executed at the orders of Ataturk. He was an Anglophile who married a wife of British descent and was accused of wanting to sell out his country to the British. Today, his great-grandson, Boris Johnson, became the UK Prime Minister. And you can see, they even look alike. But it gets even more interesting, people, because Boris Johnson, the newly elected Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has a Jewish background. His Jewish ancestry and personal experiences volunteering on an Israeli kibbutz as a young man positively impact his feelings about the land of Israel and the Jewish people. Johnson's full name is Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson. Given the middle name Boris to honor a Russian emigre his parents once knew, he chose to use that name in his political career. Boris Johnson was born in New York City in 1954 to British parents. Though pale and blonde, he has an especially colorful lineage with an intriguing combination of religions represented. He has great-grandparents who were Christian, Muslim, and Jewish, and sometimes refers to himself as a one-man melting pot. By the way, he was an American citizen. Johnson's maternal great-grandfather was a Russian Jewish immigrant named Elias Avery Lowe. Lowe was not a practicing Jew, but was descendant of strictly Orthodox Jewish rabbi from Lithuania. And this is important because in my September class, I'm going to be talking about that rabbi who was from Vilnius, in those days called Vilna, and there's a very, very important reason why Boris is now the Prime Minister of the UK, and also connects to my own family. Throughout his career, Johnson has been a strong advocate for Israel. He even wrote for the Jewish Chronicle, and which reported in 2007 that Johnson is an enemy of politically correct anti-Zionism and immensely proud of his own Jewish ancestry. And he says, and I quote, I feel Jewish when I feel the Jewish people are threatened or under attack. And that's when it sort of comes out. When I suddenly get a whiff of anti-Semitism, it's then that you feel angry and protective. He called the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in 2017 a moment of opportunity for peace. While serving as the UK's foreign secretary in 2018, he met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Johnson refers to himself as a passionate Zionist who loves the great country of Israel. So here's my prediction, people. We can expect a great connection now between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel, and the move of the UK embassy to Jerusalem at some point soon. Also, greater friendship with Russia, and the final dissolution of the EU dictatorship. And you will also notice that I had predicted a long time ago a union of English-speaking nations, and I mentioned it last podcast that I was on, that now Britain has an American Duchess. Now they have an American Prime Minister and a Jewish one. I think you're going to see very strange things happening very soon. Speaking of strange, of course this is in Arizona, which is a very strange place. A lawsuit against Arizona-based company Biological Resource Center, or BRC, has described how the donation clinic misused loved ones' bodies in grisly scenes similar to the horror novel Frankenstein. Plaintiffs state that they were misled by the company, who led them to believe that the bodies would be used for disease research or organ donation. The reality was that the owner, Stephen Gore, that's an interesting name for this kind of thing, was found guilty of operating an illegal business in 2015 after it was discovered that he had been selling body parts. And it gets more interesting because FBI special agent described various unsettling scenes at the site in Phoenix, Arizona. He said a small woman's head was sewn onto a large male torso that was hanging from the wall in a Frankenstein manner. He also spoke of a cooler filled with male genitalia, infected heads, and buckets of heads, arms, and legs with no identification tags. There was blood and body fluids on the floor of the freezer. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The show Inside Edition reported that some of the body parts were sent to the Department of Defense testing facility in Virginia to the government. Bodies were cut up using chainsaws and bandsaws, tools that are not supposed to be used in medically dismembering cadavers. They also had a price list for body parts. So, you want to buy something for Christmas? A whole upper torso is $4,000. An intact torso is $2,900. A spine, a mere $1,900. A leg from the femur to the tip of the toe, a bargain at $600. A head for $500. I think mine would be worth a little bit more. And a knee for $375. Get your shopping list ready. A full intact body could cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. I'm sure mine would go for a lot more. The owner admitted that the bodies were not used in a way that donors had permitted, and that he was overwhelmed working in an industry without regulation. So they regulate animal parts, but not human parts. Interesting. So my opinion is there is a more sinister and nefarious operation going on here. Phoenix is near many underground bases. These bodies could be used for hybridization, DNA mixes with aliens, animals, insects, etc. There's a lot more coming up of that story if the news will report it. Now, very important news for those of you who live on the surface of the earth. Italy's Mount Etna volcano is spewing hot ash and lava, and plumes of ash prompted the authorities on the island of Sicily to close all the airports. And also, if you live in the Philippines or Papua New Guinea right now, you need to know that active volcanoes can come alive and erupt at any time and spew lava and destruction. In fact, just the other day, there were 3 quakes in the Philippines that killed at least 8 people, and the Pacific Rim is moving. There is a watch list of which volcanoes to watch. Of course, Etna in Italy, Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland, Shevaluch in Russia, and there are many in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Philippines, as well as the Sakurajima volcano in Japan, and the Yastur in Vanuatu, Kilauea, Hawaii, USA, and the Pacaya volcano in Guatemala, and of course Yellowstone in Wyoming is on this list, and so is Erta Ale in Ethiopia, and a big one in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And that's just the top of the list. Remember, people, no volcano is really dormant or extinct. And that leads to my next story. Even though this story is about 3 years old, it's been revised recently, and that's why I need to tell you that the director of the Southern California Earthquake Center, Mr. Thomas Jordan, made an announcement in 2016 that he just revised, that and actually renewed, that would send a chill down everybody, their spine in California, that the San Andreas Fault appears to be in a critical state and such could generate a large earthquake imminently. He said it looks like it's locked, loaded, and ready to go. In fact, there has not been a major release of stresses in southern portions of the San Andreas Fault since 1857. The stresses between the plates are constantly building up. In all probability, the San Andreas is likely to generate a significant earthquake in the not too distant future, and when it arrives, the damage will be significant, and Southern California will be massively affected, and so will Nevada. It says to expect violent shaking, building damage, fires, widespread economic impacts as the region is out of action for a long period of time. And actually, it will be worse than I just read because there will also be liquefaction, buildings will sink into the ground, and major volcanoes like the one forming in the Mojave will erupt. Now for weather, did you know, this story is called An Inconvenient Truth. Antarctica was warmer 1,000 years ago than it is today. In fact, until recently, the Antarctic Peninsula and West Antarctica were among the most rapidly warming regions on Earth. But what does that mean? Between the 1950s and 1990s, the temperature on the Antarctic Peninsula increased by only 0.3 degrees centigrade. It's kind of almost imperceptible. And temperatures in West Antarctica over the past 2 decades appear to have plateaued or slightly cooled. East Antarctica has not experienced any significant temperature change since the 1950s, and some areas have been cooler than they have in recent decades. Cooling and an increase in snowfall in East Antarctica seems to have led to a gain in ice sheet mass and thickening of ice in the last 15 years. Lastly, and this is significant, the surface layers of the Southern Ocean have predominantly cooled over the past 3 decades, while the subpolar abysmal waters are warming due to volcanic activity under the sea. Antarctica is generally colder and has more snow depth depth than ever before. And speaking of this, I have something to show you, because a friend of mine in Taos, New Mexico, and remember, this is the month of July, the hottest month of the year everywhere, sent me a picture that he took from his back deck of the mountains in New Mexico with a fresh cover of snow in July. Snowing in New Mexico in July. Okay, that's not global warming. Also, the city of Las Vegas is inundated with flies and insects all over the buildings, all over everywhere. Insects all over the place, and it could be a result of the earthquake activity and the seismic activity that's making the creatures go crazy and nuts. So if you're in Las Vegas, get a lot of bug spray and stay inside. Now, that's the end of my report. Just to let you know, September class, 16th to the 20th of September. You better be there, because I don't know if I'll do another one after that. The webinars will also start up in September. SMOC, the Sacred Medical Order of the Knights of Hope, will have an event in Puerto Rico, September 29th to October 2nd. That will be reported or listed on the site in a little bit. And we have 3 new books that are now finished. They're being laid out for publishing, and I have started 2 more books, which I hopefully will get done before the end of this year. So 5 new books coming by, let's say, January 2020. And I thank you all for everything, and I will see you next week with my lovely Janet, who I miss very much, and I can't wait till she comes home tomorrow. It's very difficult keeping everything intact and clean. Bye for now.